Hello and welcome to the Royal United Services Institute and to a live discussion about the surprise decision of the British Prime Minister to call an early election which he suggested should be at the beginning of June. I'm Jonathan Eyal from the Institute and I'm joined by Professor Malcolm Chalmers, our Deputy Director General. Malcolm, it was a surprise. I mean, everyone, including the Prime Minister herself, has denied any intention of holding an early elections, and I'm right in saying it's also difficult in legal terms to conduct the elections on the 8th of June.
Indeed, as a result of the 2010 hung Parliament, the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats agreed to have a fixed-term Parliament. The Fixed-Term Parliament Act means that the Prime Minister can no longer simply call an election when he or she wishes to do so. So in order to have this election, Theresa May will have to get 2/3 of the House of Commons voting in favour of it, and it's anticipated that she will go to Parliament for that permission this week.
So, I mean, it's easy to be cynical and to suggest that, as any politicians, they strike while they can, and that therefore this would be, as opinion polls suggest, a very opportune moment for her to increase her majority. But could a case be made that actually this is good news, that good news for European security, good news for European stability, in a sense that we will end up, whichever way this election goes, with a Prime Minister who will have a proper mandate to negotiate what is likely to be a fairly searing kind of negotiations?
Well, I think the key thing, both in terms of the tactics of Brexit, but also I think more widely looking forward, will be what sort of mandate the Prime Minister seeks. What will be the content of the mandate she seeks? Because yes, I think you're right, that now we're going to have an election after the referendum. There will be no excuse for any of the parties to avoid the key question about what sort of Brexit they want. But I think it's going to be difficult for the government to be too specific about what sort of Brexit they want without undermining their negotiating strategy. I'm sure, given how important Brexit is for British politics right now, the Liberal Democrats, for example, will run on a very clear platform of going for as soft a Brexit as possible. And there is perhaps a risk that the choice will be too polarised, and it may paradoxically reduce the government's room for manoeuvre in the Brexit negotiations if during the election, for electoral purposes, they nail their colours to the mast of a more hard Brexit than they might otherwise have wanted.
Interesting, because what you're suggesting is a counterintuitive process, namely that whoever wins will actually be saddled with a set of assumptions about what the elections was about, and therefore not get the wide mandate for negotiation that the Prime Minister was seeking. But you mentioned the Liberal Democrats, which to the uninitiated is a small third party in the British electoral scene. But what about the Labour Party? It's a tricky one for the Labour Party, not merely because of the shall we say, controversial role of its leader, but also in terms of its Brexit stance. What do you think, how do you think the party is going to cope with the whole idea of what message it should give on the subject of the European Union?
I think the Labour Party is in a very difficult position because most of the people who currently support the Labour Party were Remain voters, but many of those who they need to attract back to the Labour Party, particularly in the north of England, were Leave voters, and it will be very difficult indeed for the Labour Party to appeal to both those constituencies, and indeed in many respects as a result they are torn. And of course we all know that Jeremy Corbyn has never been an enthusiastic supporter of Brexit and of staying in the European Union, and today is actually pointing out to the new flexibilities which Brexit may provide. So I think Labour on this issue will find it very hard to make a clear pitch as to what they would do if elected on the issue of Brexit.
Will it not be wise for Labour to concentrate on just the questions of social dumping in economic terms, namely on the questions of making sure that whatever exit from the European Union is or looks like, it will not include a Singapore style, as the cliche goes, kind of country in which there are almost no taxes, almost no workers' rights, in order to attract as much investment capital as possible. Would that be perhaps the position that you think the Labour Party will take?
I'm sure the Labour Party will be very strong on the importance of maintaining or improving social and environmental protections in the UK. I think the dilemma they will face is, will they be arguing that is something which the European Union should be imposing on the UK, or it will be something which the UK should decide for itself to have? And that's something, again, where I think there are areas in which Labour will argue that getting out of the European Union will provide more opportunities for a more statist or social democratic approach. For example, on state aid to industry, potentially being out of the European Union will allow the UK to provide more assistance to the steel industry, for example, than it can as a member.
And I think the question that I think most of our European viewers would be very interested in, viewers of the European continent itself, would be whether this election could provide a platform for a rerun of the referendum campaign. Namely, it's not God granted that the British have decided to leave. After all, the result was very narrow, and it could be argued that you have one political party, the Liberal Democrats, arguing against leaving altogether. So do you envisage any possibility of a rerun of the bigger discussion of whether Britain should leave the European Union?
Absolutely. I think this election, a large part of this election, will feel like a rerun of the referendum, because the Liberal Democrats in particular, but also I think the SNP in Scotland, will argue not that we should remain in the European Union, but that we should have as soft a Brexit as possible, something like the Norwegian model plus, in which we retain most of the responsibilities of membership, but also therefore most of the benefits. And that's a very substantial element of British political opinion. So I think as a result you will find the SNP doing well in Scotland, and you'll find the Liberal Democrats doing unexpectedly well in much of England, particularly in Remain supporting areas of the country like London.
Do you think the Prime Minister has bitten more than she could chew? I mean, the bare figures indicate a very large sort of lead for her Conservative ruling party, but could things actually turn out not to be as well as carefully thought out in Downing Street this morning?
The whole history of Western politics over the last couple of years is one surprise after another. We may well be about to see another one in France this coming weekend, and I think this election in the UK will be full of surprises as well. It may be at the end of it the Conservatives come out to win with an increased majority. That still looks the most likely outcome, but I think it will have profound consequences on the UK's bargaining in relation to Brexit, and those consequences, many of them I think will be unexpected.
And finally, do you think that the Europeans, our European partners, who are just sitting down now to decide within the next weekend about what their common negotiating stance on Brexit is likely to be, how are they going to see the goings-on in London this morning?
Well, I think our European negotiating partners will first of all ask the UK whether we should suspend negotiations until this is over, which I think would be the sensible thing to do. The UK has a long tradition of purdah in which no important policy decisions are made during election campaigns, because that would be to preempt the result of the election. So I don't think there will be any substantial progress in Brexit negotiations until this election is over and a Prime Minister is appointed after that election.
I know I said final, but I think this time we're truly final. The generation gap. Do you see young people being mobilized? We're all guessing here at this stage, but do you think that we may find a surprise that young people will not react according to the party typecasts that have existed up to now, because this issue of Brexit is so seminal Or do you think at the end of the day the electorate would fall into the traditional pattern of loyalties that we all have known over generations? We're all guessing here, but what's your feel?
I think there's an important parallel with the Scottish referendum, because what the Scottish referendum, although it resulted in a narrow loss for those who wish to leave the United Kingdom, it mobilised the leavers to a remarkable extent and then led to the SNP wiping the slate in the subsequent general election. And I think we may see something with some similarities in the UK, where the Remain camp, although it ultimately lost the referendum, it provided such a mobilisation. We've even seen it on all the demonstrations in favour of the European Union after the referendum was lost. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for some political force, if they can mobilise that very large number of disenfranchised Remain voters, particularly young voters perhaps, they can reap some electoral dividend as a result.
Thank you so much. Thank you for a very interesting discussion. The Institute, of course, has no political affiliations and no stake in who wins the elections, but we do have a stake in the future British government, in the way it shapes up, and in the implications that the British elections will have on Europe, and in that respect, we will continue our coverage.